Well, thank you. Let's call today's committee of the whole to order for March 10th, 2025. I'd like to acknowledge that this meeting is being held in the traditional territory of our friends, neighbors, and Treaty 8 partners, the Fort Nelson and Prophet River First Nation. That we further recognize the rights provided inherent in the treaty to both our communities, or all of our communities. And finally, we recognize the Métis people who have made contributions and have lived in this region for years. Please be advised that tonight's meeting is available to the public to attend virtually, is being streamed and recorded. Council, do you have any additions for this meeting, staff?
No, Mayor.
Thank you. Is there any public who wishes to comment on today's agenda online? No, in the gallery? Everybody's okay with the agenda the way it is? Good. Okay, that brings us right to the petitions and delegations. So 5.1 is Colwyn, Sunderland, Carewood, Lydell. Going to talk to us about vehicles, mobile equipment. Staff. Welcome.
It's a bit of a tag team this evening, Mayor, with Josh and Jasmine, and I think if this council's met Colwyn before.
Yeah. Good to see you again.
Hello.
Okay. Josh, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think Colin's going to bring up the PowerPoint and walk us through a few slides.
I can do that. I was expecting it to run locally, but I can have it up in just a moment. Bear with me.
So as some filler for council as we're waiting for the presentation to be pulled up. Last year in the budgets, and this year is a bit of a carry forward. We've been working on a sustainable service level process. This is essentially the icebreaker, is a bit of the start to this. It's something that was started in isolation of the other work, but it's basically, it looks at the tools to provide the services, which in this case are the vehicles and equipment, to the various services we do within the municipality. And we'll outline what the cost to provide that is, and what our current annual contribution is, and what that looks like moving forward in the future, and potential increases or needed increases to continue to maintain that service.
I think, Scott, you might have taken the whole introduction from me, but that's all good. I just want to confirm you can see the presentation.
Yes, I did. Sorry.
No problem at all. What I might do is invite Josh to jump in at this point, and I'll advance to the second slide. Can you see this presentation?
Oh, and we can see your notes view.
Okay. I wondered. Bear with me for half a second while I try to bring that back.
There we go.
That's got it?
Yep.
Perfect.
You got it.
Okay, Josh, I'll give you the next slide. Maybe. Oops. Good.
Yeah, so I can speak to this one. I'll just introduce vehicles and equipment. So just explaining the mobile asset category, which is typically any wheeled or tracked equipment or vehicles that would require plates or insurance for public road use. That said, there are exceptions for larger accessories like plow blades and compressors that don't necessarily require insurance. To be classified in this category, an item must have a replacement value of $50,000 or more, or alternatively would require license or insurance for use.
I think you were going to speak to this one, Colin.
Oh, was I? All right. Yeah. So the vehicles and equipment.
That was a smooth handoff, Josh.
Sorry.
That's okay. I was just saying that was a very smooth handoff by Josh to you.
No problem. The vehicles and equipment asset management plan or program, as we're beginning to sort of shift asset management plans to operationalized programs, fits within NRM's asset management framework, which was developed just a little over 10 years ago, with sort of the idea of a line of sight between community members through council as decision makers in establishing asset management policy, through senior management, which is really responsible for setting strategy for asset management, through the staff who are responsible for delivering services and maintaining and operating assets. So the asset management policy was established in 2013, I think formally adopted by council in 2015. Asset management plans for essentially all major infrastructure systems were developed between about 2015 and 2019, including the vehicle and equipment asset management plan. You know, the vehicles and equipment asset management plan has really been operationalized as a program with sort of annual reviews and updates over the last 5 years or so. Am I taking this one too?
Yeah, no, I can speak to this one. This is
Great.
basically the annual update process. So it's a methodology we follow to manage the NRM's fleet assets. It's been operationalized basically through an annual review and update process, which involves review and updates of asset acquisitions, disposals, changes in use and condition assessments. We review service levels, risks associated with each asset, which includes utilization, reliability, criticality, and delivery of service. And then a life cycle optimization, which includes strategies to extend lifespans, downcycling aging fleet. So as like a fire rescue for an asset that may not be reliable for them, as it can be utilized within another department of less criticality. So that's kind of the method that we use. And just, yeah, examples for levels of service. So like you said, like, you know, vehicles are essential to meeting our levels of service objectives within the NRMA. Readiness for emergencies, severe weather events, and unplanned maintenance generally governs our levels of service requirements. For fire rescue, there's the fire underwriters survey report. It provides useful and important guidance on establishing levels of service for fire apparatus. Emergency apparatus and support vehicles must be operationally ready, including specific criteria for asset age and maintenance protocols. For the Public Works Department snow removal, we used operational protocols to establish levels of service objectives and just monitor feedback to assess performance. And timely snow clearing requires sufficient capacity and reliability of heavy equipment for roads and lighter equipment for sidewalks and trails. And then any underground maintenance, the vehicles and equipment need to be well suited and maintained to ensure prompt response to unplanned maintenance. So it'll be vehicles such as like the Vactor and the excavator.
So as we look at the inventory of vehicles and equipment, and again, this has been getting updated every year. So these are sort of the most current cost estimates, replacement cost estimates that we have being reviewed sort of item by item with staff. And generally speaking, when we look at the vehicle and equipment assets, the lion's share, about 80% of vehicle and equipment assets are either heavy equipment operated by Public Works or at the airport, or emergency equipment, so fire apparatus and fire and rescue equipment. The remaining 20% or so is support equipment and light vehicles. And you know, the significant thing about this is that light vehicles support almost every service that NRM provides in one way or another. But the light vehicles comprise about 10% of the overall replacement value of the fleet. So as Josh mentioned, one of the purposes of the annual updates is to understand what the sort of timing forecast would be for renewal or replacement of vehicle and equipment assets. And this goes through sort of an optimization process that's based on looking at the criticality of vehicle and equipment assets, looking at the condition of the vehicles, looking at sort of how much how much utilization each of those has. And what we do is we look at based on all of those factors, you know, what the sort of remaining life expectancy is of each of the vehicle and equipment assets, what we can expect as sort of the life expectancy of a new vehicle or equipment asset as they're replaced over time. And of course, when we look at a time frame this far out into the future, about 25 years, we do expect that certain vehicles and equipment assets will be replaced at least once. So we're counting for those multiple replacements. And the idea with this, the objective of this kind of a forecast is to understand in those sort of light blue columns that are showing on the chart, what the overall expenditure is for renewal or replacement of vehicle and equipment assets in each year. Council has established a budget of $840,000 for vehicle and equipment replacement. That budget gets reviewed from time to time. One of the significant things that we've seen in the last few years is there's been quite a lot of inflationary pressure on the replacement value or the cost of acquiring new vehicles and equipment. And so that the annual average of the replacement cost for the vehicles and equipment in today's dollars has grown significantly over the last few years. And we're beginning to see a bit of a gap opening up between the need in terms of asset renewal expenditure at about 1.09 million and the annual renewal program funding level. So we're about $250,000 gap, annual gap in that based on our best estimates as of today. And then the sort of the jagged looking blue line is a representation of the balance of reserves. This is a somewhat simplistic analysis because we're only looking at this in today's dollars and we're not accounting for interest on reserves or of course interest on debt if you were to go sort of below that zero line. The idea of course is that we don't go below the zero line. And then the other thing that we're not accounting for is future inflation. So this is all stated in today's dollars. Couple of important points about the vehicle and equipment asset management program. One of the recommendations in the asset management plan when it was established was to do routine reviews of the vehicle and equipment inventory, recognizing that these are not some of the longest lived assets that NRM owns. It's important to look at them regularly. We had recommended sort of an annual review process, and that's been implemented fully. And through that annual review process, we've also sort of incrementally in each year of the reviews, we've been able to look at how to optimize. We started with a number of optimization scenarios that looked at sort of how we can extend lifespans for vehicles and equipment. One of the issues that we were looking at was how can we sort of begin trimming assets that were in the fleet that were at the end of life cycle, but had been retained sort of as spares. And it's not a matter of necessarily getting rid of those, but making sure that we're not accounting for needing to replace those sort of call it fully appreciated assets that remain in service or ready for service as needed as spares. And so some of those things have resulted in an opportunity to reduce the annual cost of replacement of vehicles and equipment. And we're sort of looking at this, and at this stage, I would say we're in a place where we're pretty close to fully optimized. A couple of other recommendations that are sort of still on the to-do list are to look at sort of how we operate vehicles and equipment and what the needs are for levels of service in sort of usually heavy winter weather, which is when we expect to see sort of some of that heavy equipment in public works to be at its peak utilization, as well as, of course, emergency fleet. And then we want to make sure that we're looking at the overarching strategy for renewal of vehicles and equipment, management and maintenance of vehicles and equipment about every 5 years. We're sort of in that range right now in terms of keeping an eye on the strategies that we've been operating under in the last few years. So key takeaways from this, we have essentially operationalized the fleet, the vehicle and equipment asset management program as of today. We're operating near the lowest sustainable cost, maybe at the lowest sustainable cost. Levels of service are being used as a basis for considering sort of life cycle decisions around vehicle and equipment assets and operation and maintenance of vehicle and equipment assets. The renewal funding is probably not sustainable in the long term at the current level. Probably good for a few years, but there would need to be a decision in terms of either increasing the funding level or looking at opportunities to reduce levels of service somewhere. And then finally, the way that the vehicle and equipment asset management program is currently operating provides some important insights for sort of operationalizing some of the asset management programs for other NRM asset types. We'll open it up to questions.
Thank you very much. I had a question just because I was thinking of a question and I think I missed. Can you remind me what you said the gap was between what we're paying now or what we're setting aside now and what you think it should be? Did you tell us what that gap was? You were talking about a gap and
Yeah,
I just
yes,
missed the number.
annual gap is estimated at about 250,000.
250,000. Okay, thank you. And these are conservative numbers, right? So these are as if we had to pay for this equipment entirely ourselves. No grant, no ACAP funding, nothing like that for anything out of the airport. It's as if we're paying for this stuff entirely ourselves.
ACAP
Yeah.
funding, so ACAP funding isn't factored into it though, because well, it's factored, in. We don't,
We would for snow removal equipment out at the airport.
at the airport,
but-
yeah, so we wouldn't, yeah, so that's not, so that is factored in, yeah.
It is factored
Yeah,
in.
yeah, so.
Okay, so the
in terms of getting
replacement
equipment-
value is taken into consideration, including the ACAP then.
Yes, so the value that we would have to contribute, just to make sure we're talking the same thing
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
yeah, so we are assuming that any of the replacement that would meet the criteria at the airport would be ACAP funded, and it's not included into the annual contribution.
Okay.
Yeah, that-
Okay.
Okay.
Yep, that's good. And so we're currently at about 1.6% then of our value of our equipment. Right? So the 700 and whatever you said, 800 and some, of 19 million total value. Is there a rule of thumb amongst communities with respect to what the replacement value should be on a percentage to the actual, to your asset, total value of your asset, all the equipment? Is there a rule of thumb out there?
I'm not aware of a rule of thumb per se. I mean, we have to consider sort of the overall, the range of replacement value of the vehicle and equipment assets that you have. Some assets are longer lived than others. We've
Right.
definitely seen lifespans of light vehicles it getting extended for what we call regular duty. Heavy equipment tends to last longer, and I would say that NRM is operating sort of at the longest end of the range of life cycles that you typically would expect for new vehicles and equipment at this point. So, and that would be looking at sort of up to 25 years for some of the heavy equipment assets.
Right? And that comes with, obviously, that comes with increased operation and maintenance costs.
Yeah, it would certainly, or reduced levels of service in terms of reliability of some of those assets. And I think NRM's strategy with respect to having sort of older vehicles downcycled in terms of the level of service for serving as secondary or spare fleet to be used at periods of heavy activity enables NRM to get good value out of some of those older heavy equipment assets in particular, without concern about lower levels of service impacting operations.
Right, okay. So essentially in our circumstance, as a percentage of overall value, about 2% is, if you're looking at $250,000 gap based on what we're doing now, it's in the order of 2 to 2.2%. We should be putting away, and we're putting away 1.6 or something.
Yeah, because
Okay.
the formula is based on total amount of equipment we have, what the expected life expectancy
Yeah.
of that is, and the replacement cost, and that's what determines a number, and then we push some of the equipment to the limit, but we factor in we use a plow truck as an example because we're running 3 plow trucks. We've had in the past where we've had a plow truck that's been on a list, but it's mechanically been working fine for us, but we know that we're not going to put any more money into it. So we essentially take a chance
Yeah.
throughout the winter and advise council year before that it's on the list, but we're going to buy another year for lack of better words. And it's mechanically runs for us because we know we're not good. We don't, when you start looking at 10, 15-year-old trucks, for example, you don't get much for them when you sell them.
Yeah. Well, and the biggest gap there would be the service interruption in the event that it
Yes,
failed
that's the
and you had a
risk.
big snowfall.
That's the
That
risk.
would be, that's the risk you take, because it takes
that's
a
the
year or so probably to get a new one in, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, thanks, Colin. I appreciate, you answering my questions. Are there any other questions anybody has? No? Okay, well, thank you very much, Colin. Appreciate it. Give us a pretty good handle, I think, and I start on, because there's a whole lot more or many more asset groups that you're gonna want to talk to us about with respect to this same number or this.
Yeah, this one here was more, that's an easier one because it
Yeah.
kind of overlaps a bunch of different service areas where
Yeah.
once you start getting the water and sewer and roads, there's specific service areas for that particular area. So this supports all of them. And then, of course, with the other ones, there's also discussion with council in terms of the actual operational service component and the costs associated with that. Because in some areas and some organizations, or I'll pick on regional districts, for example, the operational costs, including the capital and replacement and renewal costs, are usually factored into what that service fee would be to support that particular service, right? So yeah, one of many.
Good.
Yeah, for council.
Kyle, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just sorry, this is our, I guess, vehicle asset management. I'm sure there's one for buildings and stuff. How many of them are we gapped with funding?
All of them.
I assume so, but I figure we're coming into budget and stuff, we should air it out.
Yeah, so I mean, we're not in a position from a financial perspective, we're nervous that we don't have the ability to recover. I think the mayor, mentioned it last year, the year before during budget, like just because we say this is what we should contribute, I mean, it doesn't mean you have to. However, at some point in time, it's going to bite you down the road because if you don't plan for the future and put those funds away, then you either pay now or pay later, and usually when you pay later, you're paying more. But the intent before we didn't want to piecemeal this as part of a budget process. We wanted to give that fulsome review of council, so you take a look at everything holistically and look at what the gaps are. And then, of course, we started budget conversations tomorrow, but a part of that, a good news story, in terms of the IDCA agreement, of course, is we're seeing a bit of an increase, which actually helps that, because that gap, with the contributions to the reserve funds.
Hmm.
Of course, mobile equipment doesn't fall under the IDCA agreement.
Yeah.
That needs to be funded completely by the NRM, but we have gaps in the other areas too, especially considering that even from an operational perspective, we fund a lot of our services with general taxation,
Yeah.
which is a council choice for obvious reasons.
Well, I asked the question about ACAP and the potential grants that you get, to start that conversation, because as we start going down, there's potential for us to get 33-cent dollars, right? With any federal or provincial infrastructure grants, for instance. And so I'll be asking the same question, I guess, when we get to those, are those factored in? Because they're not always available, but quite frequently they are, depending on which government's in place. And so there's that opportunity, to capitalize, I guess, on those 33-cent dollars, right?
Yeah.
One third. So.
Absolutely. I mean, we've done that, and there's lots of examples of infrastructure that we've put in, or the renewal of certain infrastructure that's been part of grant funding, and they factor in the IDCA piece. And all it does is when you reevaluate it, that's the purpose of reevaluating on a regular basis, is so that you have the ability to see where the number sits versus what you need, because things change. I mean, inflation's really kicked us around here the past couple of years, of course, on the roadside is the one example. But on the other side, for those who've had a chance to kind of take a look at the budget binder on the reserve funding perspective, we've done quite well also because of interest rates with interest on those funds in the reserves, right? So that helps contribute, which helps offset the required taxation for future years. So
If you're,
That's a fact.
but if you're conservative in your approach and you end up with a federal infrastructure grant, well, that's a boon, right? Now all of a sudden you can reevaluate and
Absolutely.
see what your reserves look like, and you use it. That's the thing. It's
Yeah.
the one you have to actually use the 30%
Yeah.
dollars. Yeah. Okay. Good. Any other questions? Okay, well, I thank you, Colin, for coming in today. Appreciate it. Appreciate staff for the report.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Okay, the next order of business is a delegation from Kevin Hunt, Urban Systems, to talk about the accessible parking plan. Staff, please. Yeah. We're all friends. Good afternoon.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So just to remind Council, in late 2023, we received a letter from the Local Accessibility and Inclusion Committee regarding the establishment of accessible on-street parking in Fort Nelson. Shortly after that, staff brought a report to council, basically with information about accessible on-street parking, and council resolved to establish that parking. Since then, we've been working with Urban Systems to, and as well as the Public Works Department to establish potential locations within the downtown area of Fort Nelson. And as part of your package, you'll have a memo included as attachment 1, which outlines the information, the proposal for accessible on-street parking in Fort Nelson. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kevin and defer to council on how much detail you'd like to go into in reviewing the memo.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. I came up from Fort St. John and been involved with a lot of the downtown sidewalk and paver replacement projects over the last few years with the public works side of things. And then this project was also done in coordination with Dan Casey, who's professional planner here on the line from Victoria. But here to help answer any questions. I have the document on my computer. I'm not sure how much you've read, if you want to go through all of it, none of it. Here for any support I can give.
Okay, I was pretty comfortable with it. I was surprised by the cost, to tell you the truth. I get, wow, $10,000 to put in, some paint, but it's more than that. Your report was good. It explained that it was more than just putting in some paint and, so, I was pretty comfortable with it. I do like, the phased approach potentially. I like the idea that we're going to consult with business owners before we actually, and I guess maybe that is a question from an experience perspective. How do business owners normally respond to this? Because I imagine you've done this in more than just our community. How do business owners normally respond to the idea that you're going to take up a little bit of their parking space, right, for other vehicles in order to have this right in front of their business?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one depends on the project and depends on the municipality or the town. This example here for everything that we're looking at doing downtown is just for the 2 meters beyond back of curb. So it's similar to what we've been doing with the paver replacement projects and the concrete replacement downtown, is we're doing that 2 meters beyond curb. And depending on the business owner, they've been more than happy to do the other few meters before their building entrance. And others are a little bit more reluctant to do it. Also, I know that concrete is very difficult to obtain up here. Last year we had the terrace construction, DGA, pull out of town for their concrete plant. I know there are some talks going on right now with that. So it does get very expensive, especially for a business owner if they're kind of putting in additional cost. In terms of other business kind of thoughts, I might turn it over to Dan.
Yeah, we've done this sort of thing. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me tonight. Yeah, we've done this sort of thing in a number of other communities throughout the province. I think generally it's reasonably well received, provided that the area they're going into, there's sort of a general availability of conventional parking spaces. I think where we actually start to see some benefits and businesses really supportive is where those businesses tend to serve people who have mobility needs and benefit from this parking. And the presence of this accessible parking right out in front can actually be a great benefit from that perspective. And that there's a designated stall nearby the front door that actually encourages those folks to shop at those businesses.
Good.
And I would like to note that many of the locations identified by the AAC and a few extra by the municipality already do have some signage or a variation of an accessible parking spot. Oftentimes it's the closest to the door. But just because it's closest to the door doesn't mean that it's really well suited for those with mobility issues. So
Might be
this really
close, but
aims
there's a
to-
curb there.
Exactly, yeah. So this aims to resolve that. They're all the same. They'll all have the same signage, which is universal signage. It'll have new letdowns for wheelchair users or senior citizens, others. And then it'll also potentially have the line painting aspect as well, just to define it. And we all know how line painting kind of works around here in the winter, the 6 months of the year. But between being able to visualize it in the summer and then having the signage and the visible letdown, I think it'll go a long way.
Good. Anybody else? Oh, please.
Are these particular businesses meeting the requirements for accessibility into their properties? Do they have ramps or whatever else they would need?
That's a great question. Yes and no. A few of the businesses, I'll pick on A&W for an example. The A&W building does have an accessible parking stall right now, but it's not clearly defined. So one of our recommendations was an off-street parking, which would be within the residential property or the commercial property of A&W. A few extra pieces of signage would go a long way, making it clear and having others not park in that stall. A lot of the businesses along 50 Ave North or 50 Ave South, this would be really the only thing you need before going inside. So the existing sidewalk at the door sill is flush and provides that mobility access. But right now it's a challenge to get off the street or from their vehicle onto the sidewalk. So I think most of them do have that in place.
I'm thinking about Home Hardware. Does it have a ramp?
Home
It's got
Hardware
steps out
does.
front. It does have a
Or-
ramp, yeah.
Ace,
It's got like a little, yeah.
yeah.
But that's your question, right? Is that, you know, do they have that? Are we putting it there for the wrong reason? Yeah. And then if they've got access to the sidewalk.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think what we're hoping is that those business owners like A&W or Scotiabank or City Furniture, where there's off-street parking potential, that when we have those conversations with the business owners, then that opens up the broader conversation of it's not just about parking, it's about, you know, maybe looking at your businesses becoming a little more accessible as well.
And I know we had a very good conversation last year with Ed's Ace Hardware, where we did the paver replacement project. He was actually planning and got quotation from the concrete company who was doing the work to do a new ramp into his building, because that is an example of a building that does not have accessible access at the moment. So yeah, it depends on the owner, but a lot of them have been very willing. If you have half of it done by the municipality and paid for by the municipality, it does help. So.
Perfect. Anybody else? Oh, okay, well, thank you very much for driving all the way up here. Hopefully you had some
Absolutely.
things to do besides just this
Absolutely.
15-minute meeting. Okay,
Thank you
Good.
for having us. Appreciate
Yeah.
your time.
thanks for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thanks. Thanks for tuning in from down there. Okay. There's no additions. Is there any questions online? Anybody? No? Okay, then we are adjourned until 6:30.